The first thing Consul Examiner Veth noticed was the smell. Not the ship itself. Warships of the Dominion Compact smelled of processed atmosphere and recycled mineral compounds, same as every vessel in the fleet. No, it was the human quarters that stopped her mid-stride, 3 steps past the airlock threshold, her olfactory organs flaring against her will. Something organic, something that had been asterisk burned, and beneath it, threading through the sharper notes like a root system beneath pavement, something she had no catalogued reference for. Sweet, almost biological, faintly wrong. She looked at her aide, Prefect San, who had pressed his secondary hands flat against his thorax in the Keth gesture, for I don't know either. On the floor just inside the doorway there was a small metal cylinder, dented and blackened at one end, no larger than her forearm. The human who had been escorted out 20 minutes ago had left it there. Deliberately, she suspected. They always left things deliberately. She didn't touch it. She didn't yet know what it was, but she was already afraid. 3 weeks before the cylinder appeared on that floor, the Dominion Compact had done something it had never done in 400 years of galactic governance. It had issued a confiscation order against a species that had not yet been formally granted Class 3 sovereignty status. The species was, of course, human. The order covered all devices, systems, compounds, and materials developed independently by human civilization that had not been pre-approved under the Integration Accords. The legal justification took 11 pages to construct and 3 senior jurists 7 weeks to assemble. The political justification took 30 seconds. "They are building things," Senior Arbiter Orenvel had said during the closed session that preceded the vote, "that we do not understand." The chamber had been quiet after that, not the quiet of disagreement, the quiet of consensus recognizing itself. The vote was unanimous. Commander Lena Vasquez heard about the order the same way most humans in the outer stations heard about it. From someone who wasn't supposed to tell her, who had heard it from someone else, during a shift change handover in the lower maintenance corridors of Relay Post Ashford 9. The man who told her was an engineer named Project, and he said it the way people say things they haven't fully processed yet, flatly, like reading from a list. "They're confiscating our gear, all of it, any tech we built ourselves. They're calling it an accord violation." Vasquez was holding a cup of coffee. She didn't put it down. When? Already started on the Meridian stations. They hit the research labs first. The asterisk research labs asterisk. Yeah. She finally set the cup down, not because she was upset, because she needed her hands free. "Which lab specifically?" Project hesitated. That hesitation told her everything she needed. Bauer's team, the low-temp materials group, and the Hendrix cohort, the ones working on the signal propagation stuff. Vasquez was quiet for exactly 4 seconds. Then, "Who else knows?" "Everyone by now. It went through the channels fast." She nodded slowly. She was already thinking about the cylinder. Here is the first thing the Dominion Compact got wrong about the confiscation order. They believed the humans would be confused by it. This was not an unreasonable assumption. The Integration Accords were complex even by Dominion standards, and humans had only been operating under their jurisdiction for 19 years. The legal architecture alone required decades of scholarly study to navigate competently. Most newly integrated species spent their first century in a state of procedural bewilderment, seeking clarification, filing appeals, requesting arbitration on nearly every significant governance question. The Dominion had built entire administrative departments around managing that bewilderment. It was almost kind, in its way, a structured system for explaining to younger civilizations why things had to be the way they were. The humans filed no appeals. They requested no clarifications. They did not contact the arbitration offices. Instead, within 72 hours of the order's announcement, 17 human engineers on 3 separate stations, had transferred the documentation for every project covered by the confiscation into a file format that did not exist in any Dominion registry. Consul Examiner Veth learned about the file format on day 4. She learned about it because Dominion technical analysts had spent 2 days attempting to open the files and had failed. Not failed as in encountered an error asterisk. Failed as in the files behaved in a way that suggested they were not files in any sense the analysts understood. They appeared to respond to access attempts. The lead analyst, a Keth named Arun, had submitted a report that ended with a single line that Veth had read 4 times before accepting that it said what she thought it said. The files appear to be aware that we are trying to open them. She had called Arun directly, explained that. I cannot, Arun said. That is why I wrote it that way. Vasquez was in the middle of a meeting she hadn't called when the Dominion Compact representatives arrived at Ashford 9. There were 6 of them, 3 Keth enforcers in the gray and amber of the Integration Authority, 2 administrative prefects carrying scanning devices she recognized, but had been told not to recognize, and Consul Examiner Veth herself, who was shorter than Vasquez had expected and moved with the particular careful deliberateness of someone who had spent years learning not to show what they were thinking. The enforcers moved through the corridors with their scanners running. Vasquez watched them the way you watch weather. Commander Vasquez, Veth said. Her translator rendered the name with an accent that made it sound almost like a question. You understand why we are here? I do. Then you understand the order requires full compliance. All qualifying technology must be surrendered for registration and review. I understand that's what the order says. A pause. Is there a distinction you are drawing? Vasquez looked at her steadily. Not yet. The second thing the Dominion Compact got wrong. They thought the humans were hiding the technology. By day 6 of the confiscation operation, Dominion teams had swept 17 human-occupied stations, 2 research outposts, and 1 long-haul transport vessel. They had collected, according to their own inventory logs, approximately 430 individual devices, components, or materials fitting the confiscation criteria. The scans showed the human quarters, labs, and storage facilities were now clean, compliant. Senior Arbiter Oren Vell, reviewing the reports from his office on the Compact's administrative station, had felt something he later described as asterisk relief asterisk. He would later learn that relief was a trap. Because the humans hadn't been hiding the technology, they had been copying it. Every device, every schematic, every compound formula had been reproduced, not digitally. The Dominion had specifically anticipated and blocked digital reproduction channels, but asterisk manually asterisk. Handwritten notes. Verbal instruction sessions recorded in audio formats so basic the Dominion systems hadn't flagged them as data. Physical models built from non-qualifying materials that were, individually, meaningless, but which encoded structural information in their proportions, their weight distribution, the specific sequence in which they had been assembled. Vasquez had not organized this. It had simply happened. She had mentioned to 3 people on 3 different stations what was coming and what it would mean, and then she had stepped back, and the humans had done what humans do when someone explains that a thing they care about is about to be taken. They had distributed it so completely that there was no longer any single place to take it asterisk from. The Dominion discovered this on day 9, when a confiscated device was disassembled for analysis, and the junior Keth technician assigned to the task realized that the component schematic etched into the interior casing, faint, almost invisible, present only under specific light conditions, matched a device that had been surrendered on a completely different station 4 days earlier. They were not different devices, they were 2 halves of an instruction set. When Arun submitted this finding to Veth, he included a question. How many devices do we need to cross-reference before we understand what is being communicated? Veth looked at the question for a long time, Then she typed back, "I don't think that's the right question." What is the right question? How long have they been planning this? By word of count, the story had seeded its first layers. But the deepest one had not yet surfaced, the one that would make Veth stop sleeping. Vasquez had grown up in a part of Earth's history that most humans preferred to treat as settled. She didn't. Her grandmother had told her stories about the period immediately before unified global communication, when information was controlled by proximity, by access, by who owned what channel. And her grandmother had said something that Vasquez had carried since childhood like a stone in a pocket, something to press a thumb against when thinking. The most dangerous thing you can do to a people is teach them that their knowledge belongs to someone else, because that's the moment they start building in the dark. She had never told the Dominion this. She had never told anyone outside of a small circle of humans who already understood it. But she thought about it every day of the confiscation operation, and she thought about it specifically on day 11, when Veth's team came back to Ashford 9 for a second sweep, and Veth herself walked into Vasquez's quarters with the expression of someone who has begun to suspect they are playing a game whose rules they were never shown. "The cylinder," Veth said, "the one your engineer left." "I'm not sure what you mean." "You know exactly what I mean." Veth looked at her. "Our analysts have been examining it for 6 days. They cannot determine its function. They cannot determine its material composition with certainty. They can determine that it has been used heavily. What is it?" Vasquez sat back, took a breath. "It's a lighter." A long silence. "A fire-making device," Veth said. "A portable combustion implement." "Yes. It is 400 years old by human reckoning." "About that." "Your engineers left a 400-year-old fire-making device in a room we were about to search." "Project likes his antiques." Veth stared at her. "Commander Vasquez, I want to be very direct with you. I have been conducting integration authority operations for 30 years. I have overseen confiscation proceedings against 11 species. I have never felt during any of those proceedings that I was being shown something." She stopped. "Your engineer left that device intentionally. What was he showing us?" Vasquez held the eye contact for a moment. "That some things," she said, "can't be taken." This is the moment the story shifts, not in what is happening but in what it means. Because Veth went back to her office that evening and pulled every record the Dominion Compact possessed on human history, and she read for 8 hours straight, and what she found did not answer her questions. It multiplied them. Humans had fire for 300,000 years before they had writing. They had medicine before they had chemistry. They had structural engineering before they had mathematics formal enough to explain why it worked. They had over and over across their entire developmental record, built things they could not fully theorize, operated with tools they could not fully explain, and preserved knowledge through methods so redundant, so distributed, so deeply embedded in physical practice and oral tradition and bodily memory that the concept of a central repository, a place where knowledge lived that could be found and taken, had never fully applied to them. The Dominion Compact had assumed it was confiscating technology. It had not considered the possibility that for humans, technology was not a thing they had asterisk. It was a thing they were asterisk. Veth sat in the dark of her office with this thought and felt the ground shift beneath her. Then she pulled up the inventory of confiscated devices again, 430 items. She had felt relief looking at this number. Now she looked at it again. What did we actually take? Not the schematics, which were distributed across handwritten notes and vocal recordings and component proportions. Not the underlying knowledge which lived in the hands and minds of several thousand human engineers. Not the process. Not the method. Not the understanding asterisk. They had taken objects. They had taken the physical husks of human thinking and left the thinking entirely intact. She opened a new report and began to write. She got 3 sentences in before stopping, because the 3 sentences she had written implied something that she was not prepared to formally submit to the senior arbiter. She sat with the implication instead, testing its edges. If the Dominion's confiscation had failed, not procedurally, not technically, but fundamentally asterisk at the level of category error, then the humans knew it had failed. And if the humans knew it had failed, then they had watched the Dominion conduct 6 weeks of intensive operations that accomplished nothing, while the humans had cooperated fully, surrendered everything asked of them, and were now sitting, perfectly compliant, in possession of every piece of knowledge the Dominion had attempted to remove. She thought about the cylinder on the floor, 400 years old, left deliberately. Some things can't be taken. The humans hadn't been resisting the confiscation. They had been demonstrating something. And Veth, 30 years into her career, with 11 species worth of integration experience behind her, was only now beginning to understand what. She picked up her communicator, San. Consul Examiner. Get me the full personnel files on the human engineers from the Bauer Group, all of them, and pull the Hendrix cohort records. I want to know what they were working on before the order. A pause. That information was included in the confiscation assessment. We reviewed it. We reviewed what they told us they were working on. Another pause longer. I'll pull the files. The Hendrix cohort had been listed in the confiscation documentation as a * signal propagation research group. This was true the way saying a river is * water movement * is true, accurate, stripped of everything that makes it meaningful. What Dr. Asha Hendrix had actually built, over 6 years of work conducted on 3 stations with a team of 9 engineers and 2 physicists, was not a signal propagation system in any sense the Dominion's technical classification scheme recognized. Veth stared at the raw project files for a very long time. The confiscation had taken their equipment, their servers, their physical prototypes, everything Dominion classified as * technological material *. What the assessment team had not taken because they had not understood what they were looking at were the research journals, physical notebooks, handwritten, logged as * personal documents, exempt under Accord Provision 7.4, which protected personal correspondence and private records from confiscation. 11 notebooks. Veth had copies now, translated by the Dominion's best human language scholars. The scholars had flagged them as * technically dense and partially incomplete *. This was, Veth realized with a cold sensation moving through her, the Dominion's greatest misread yet. The notebooks weren't incomplete. They were written in 2 layers. The surface layer was genuine research documentation, following every academic convention, readable by anyone with sufficient physics background. But threaded through it, embedded in annotation choices, in the specific vocabulary Hendrix used for certain variables, in cross-references to papers that didn't exist, a second language, encoding something else entirely. It took Veth's most senior analyst 2 full days, and a significant amount of what the analyst later described as personal distress to decode enough of the second layer to understand what it contained. Not the research itself, a location, a sequence of coordinates and timing windows expressed with enough precision to be operational. A meeting. Veth looked at the coordinates. She looked at the timing windows. She looked at how many of the confiscation subjects' files contained documents now flagged as personal records *. 43 of them. 43 humans across 11 stations, all of whom had been interviewed, cleared, and marked compliant. All of whom had, in the personal documents left behind in their quarters, some version of the same information. She had 6 days before the first timing window opened. San, she said, I need a ship. The third thing the Dominion got wrong, the one that would cost the most, was believing that Vasquez was the architect. She wasn't. She was the face, the visible point of compliance, the person who met with Veth and answered questions calmly and said things like "not yet" and left pauses in exactly the right places. She was extraordinarily good at this, and it was genuinely her own contribution. But she hadn't designed the distributed documentation network, or the two-layer notebook protocol, or the file format that Orun's team couldn't open. Or what was sitting at the coordinates Veth was now racing toward in a Dominion fast courier. All of that had come from a 41-year-old materials physicist named Yusuf Adebyo, who had a habit of writing equations on napkins, who had not been listed in any confiscation priority document, who had been assessed by the Integration Authority as asterisk support staff, non-primary asterisk, and who had, over the preceding 4 months, coordinated the single largest distributed knowledge preservation operation any species had conducted under Integration Authority jurisdiction. Vasquez knew Adebyo. Not well, they had met 3 times, but she knew what he was asterisk, which was something the Dominion had no category for. Not a leader, not a commander, not an authority figure. A asterisk connector asterisk. Someone who understood how knowledge moved between people, who could look at a system and see where the flow was, and redirect it without ever touching the system's labeled controls. When the confiscation order had been announced, Adebyo had not been alarmed. He had been, by his own later account, interested. He had spent 48 hours thinking, and then he had sent 43 messages to 43 people on 11 stations, each message containing a different fragment, and he had trusted, correctly, that the humans who received those fragments would understand what to do with them, because he had spent 4 years making sure they would. He had not told Vasquez any of this. He had told her only one thing, at the very beginning, in a message that the Dominion had not flagged, because it had arrived in a format the scanning systems didn't prioritize. They'll look for what we built, make sure they find it. She had understood immediately. The coordinates led Veth to a dead relay station in a debris field that the Dominion's navigation charts listed as asterisk hazardous and uninhabited asterisk. The station was old, not Dominion old. Human old, which meant something different. It had the particular quality of human construction that Veth was beginning to recognize. Built faster than it should have been from materials that weren't quite right for the purpose, with solutions in place of every instance where the correct component hadn't been available. It should have been a compromise structure. Somehow it wasn't. Somehow it held. Her team approached carefully, full sensor array running. The station was active. Inside, and this is the part Veth would spend the rest of her career trying to explain in reports, because the words she had for it were not quite right. Inside, there were humans. Not 43. Hundreds. Some in person, some on screens, some in audio-only links that suggested they were transmitting from locations her scanner couldn't pin. And in the center of the station's main bay, surrounded by whiteboards covered in notation and tables covered in notebooks, and one ancient coffee machine that appeared to have been running continuously for several days, was a man she didn't recognize. Short, wearing a sweater with a small burn mark on the left cuff, writing something on a board. He stopped writing when he heard her team enter, turned around, looked at her team's Dominion uniforms, then at Veth, then back at the board. "You decoded the notebooks," he said, not a question. "You wanted us to find this," Veth said. Adebyo tilted his head. "I wanted the right person to find it. Are you the right person?" "I am the consul examiner of the Integration Authority." "That's not what I asked." The room was quiet. Every human in it was watching her. "What is this place?" Veth asked. "It's a workshop," Adebyo said. "We're working." "On what?" He smiled. It was not an aggressive expression. It was the smile of someone who is genuinely pleased that the conversation has arrived where he expected it to. "On the problem your arbiter created when he issued that order." He turned back to the board. "Sit down if you want. This part takes a while to explain. What Adebio showed Veth over the next 4 hours would have been difficult for most Dominion officials to follow. Veth, who had spent 30 years in integration authority work and had made a personal study of newly integrated species technological development arcs, followed it, which was, she suspected, why the notebooks had led her here rather than someone else. The Hendrix cohort's signal propagation research had never been, primarily a communications project. It was an energy transmission system. Specifically, a method of transmitting structured energy across distances in a way that didn't require the physical infrastructure the Dominion's own grid depended on. No relay stations, no cables, no licensed transmission nodes. Energy moved through a medium the Dominion's physics frameworks called asterisk noise, or random background radiation, the static that sat beneath every transmission in the galaxy like the sound of breathing in an empty room. Humans had been working on this for 11 years. They were close. Not finished, but close. The Dominion's confiscation order, which had swept up the physical prototypes and the lab equipment, had slowed them down by approximately 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Veth said. Give or take. We took everything. You took the tools, Adebio said. We still have the understanding. He wrote something on the board. We would have come to you eventually. Filed the registration, gone through the accord process, spent the next decade trying to get a fair technology-sharing framework negotiated. He looked at her. Your arbiter didn't want to wait for that. The arbiter was concerned about things he didn't understand, Adebio said. Yes, we know. He wasn't angry. He was calm in a way that felt more serious than anger. That's the part I need you to understand, Consul Examiner. When you don't understand something, you confiscate it. When we don't understand something, we study it. That's the whole difference. Veth sat with this, and if what you're studying is dangerous, then you should have been studying it with us. The fourth thing the Dominion got wrong. They didn't ask what happens to a human when you take something they built. Not practically, not procedurally, they didn't ask what it does to them. Vasquez had not been calm during the confiscation operation. She had appeared calm. She had been calm in every interaction with Veth's team, calm in every meeting, calm in the way she set down the coffee cup and freed her hands, calm in the way she answered questions. But there was a thing that had happened in the lower maintenance corridor of Ashford 9 when Project told her about the labs, when he said the words asterisk Bauer's team and Hendrix cohort, and she had felt it move through her like a current. Not fear, something colder. She had been 22 years old when she first understood what engineering was, not the mechanics of it, the meaning. She had been working on a water reclamation project on a station that couldn't afford the Dominion standard equipment, and they had built the system themselves from components that weren't designed for the purpose. And the first time it ran successfully, she had stood in front of it and felt something she didn't have adequate words for, only an approximation, that she had added something to the world that hadn't been there before. That it was asterisk hers asterisk, not in the sense of ownership, but in the sense of asterisk origin asterisk. She had made it exist. Humans built things. This was not a cultural preference or a civilizational quirk. It was something older than language, older than fire even, the drive to shape the environment, to push back against entropy, to leave something that hadn't been there when you arrived. When the integration authorities' confiscation teams moved through human stations with their scanners and their inventory forms, cataloging and removing and boxing up and labeling, they were doing something they experienced as routine administrative procedure. The humans experienced it as something that had no equivalent in Dominion languages. Veth understood this on day 23 of the operation, sitting in the relay station, watching a room full of humans who had been working without adequate sleep for what the burn marks and the coffee machine and the general state of their notebooks implied was at least a week, working specifically on a problem that had been made harder by the confiscation, working on it not because they had been ordered to, Not because there was a competitive incentive. Not because the project was funded and staffed and scheduled, but because the work was asterisk there, and they were asterisk here, and those two facts together created in the human mind a kind of gravity that apparently nothing, not confiscation orders, not legal authority, not the combined administrative weight of 400 years of galactic governance, had been sufficient to overcome. "How many people are working on this?" Veth asked. Adebio thought about it, genuinely thought about it like the number required calculation. Right now, maybe 600 across all stations, maybe more. It's hard to track, people keep joining. Without being asked. They heard about it. Veth stopped. That's not how species organize. Adebio looked at her with an expression she couldn't read. How do species organize? Hierarchically, through command structures, through incentive systems. Someone issues a directive, someone tracks compliance. He nodded. Yes, we can do that too. He paused. We just don't always need to. Veth's report to the senior arbiter was 37 pages. She had written reports before that were longer, but she had never written one that took her as long, because she kept arriving at conclusions that she had to stop and reconstruct from the beginning, because they were conclusions she did not want to be writing. The core of the report, in the language she finally settled on after 4 attempts, was this: the confiscation order had not failed. It had succeeded procedurally. Every item fitting the confiscation criteria had been cataloged and removed. No human had physically resisted or violated the order's terms. The authorities' teams had done exactly what they were empowered to do. The order had failed in a more fundamental sense, which was that its objective, to remove from human possession the capability represented by the confiscated technology, had not been and could not have been achieved by the mechanism of the order, because the mechanism of the order was designed for a category of problem the humans did not represent. She wrote this, and then she wrote the line that had been sitting in her mind since the relay station. The Dominion Compact has never encountered a species whose primary advantage was that the species itself was the repository. Then she wrote the part that she had debated for 3 days whether to include. The energy transmission system, its implications, what it would mean for the Dominion grid's infrastructure monopoly, what it would mean for every species in the outer territories that currently depended on licensed relay infrastructure. What it would mean that the humans had built it not because they had been trying to challenge Dominion systems. They had not. She was now certain of this. They had simply been trying to solve a problem. And what it would mean that the confiscation order had, by demonstrating to 600 human engineers that their work was considered threatening enough to suppress, given that work a kind of significance it had not previously possessed. Before the order, the Hendrix Cohorts project had been a research initiative. After the order, it was a statement. She sealed the report, sent it, sat for a long time in the silence of her office. Her communicator chimed. "Son, Consul Examiner, the senior arbiter has reviewed the first section of your report. And he wants to know if the recommendation is to issue a follow-up order." Veth closed her eyes. "Tell him no. He'll ask what you recommend instead. Tell him to read the rest of the report. He says he wants your summary first." She thought about the relay station, the coffee machine, the burn mark on Adebio's cuff, the room full of people no one had told to be there, the notebook with 2 layers, the cylinder on the floor, 400 years old, left by a man who liked antiques in a room that was about to be searched as a demonstration. "Tell the arbiter," she said, "that I recommend we ask the humans for help." A very long pause. "He won't like that." "No," Veth agreed, "he won't." The negotiations took 8 months. They were not easy months. The senior arbiter resisted at every stage, and there were 3 separate attempts by other members of the Compact's governing body to find a legal mechanism for a secondary confiscation order, all three of which Veth successfully argued against using the precedent she had spent the intervening time establishing in the authorities' case archives. She did this partly because she believed it was correct. She did it partly because she had spoken with Vasquez again, 3 months into the negotiations, and Vasquez had said something she thought about constantly. "You know what the worst version of this is," Vasquez had said. They were sitting in the same room where the cylinder had been found. Someone had cleaned the floor. If this works out and we build something together that actually helps people the whole time we're doing it, your arbiter is going to think he made it happen, because he issued the order. "Does that matter?" Veth had asked. Vasquez looked at her. "It matters because the next time he doesn't understand something, he'll do it again." Veth hadn't had an answer for that, she still didn't, but she carried it. The energy transmission system, when it was finally completed 22 months after the confiscation order, with Dominion Resources in partnership, properly registered under a framework that took 6 months to negotiate, and 3 human lawyers and 2 Keth jurists to assemble, worked better than the models had projected. Significantly better. The reasons for this were partly technical and partly something that the engineers involved were reluctant to put in formal documentation, but that several of them said privately, which was that working with the Dominion's resources had given them access to materials and testing environments that their station-based research had lacked, and that this had allowed them to solve problems they had been routing around for years. Adebio, at the system's first operational test, had stood next to Veth and watched the numbers come in on the display, and he had said nothing for almost a minute, and then he had said, very quietly, "We would have gotten here anyway." "I know," Veth said. "I just want that on the record." "It's on the record." He nodded, looked at the display. "How long before the arbiter tries to license it exclusively to compact members?" Veth was quiet. "I have 3 arguments prepared." Adebio looked at her sideways. "Only 3. San is working on a 4th. He almost smiled. "Almost good." The galaxy did not change overnight. This is the part that the histories get wrong, or rather, the part that the histories simplify, because change at scale is slow and uneven and full of reversals and renegotiations, and the grinding friction of institutions that were built for a different world trying to operate in a new one. The Dominion Compact did not become something different after the confiscation order and its failure. It continued. Its bureaucracies continued. Its arbiters continued. But something had entered the system. Something that moved through it the way the humans moved through everything, not by overcoming it from the outside, but by operating inside it, learning its pressures and flows, finding where it bent, building in the places it couldn't reach. 7 years after the confiscation order, there were 219 humans working in Dominion administrative offices across 11 star systems. 43 of them were in positions where they drafted or reviewed integration accord policy. None of them had been appointed to these positions through political pressure or negotiated quota. They had applied. They had qualified. They had, in several cases, rewritten the qualification standards that hadn't previously existed for their roles, and then qualified under the standards they had written. And the Compact's administrative system had accepted this, because the system could not identify which procedural rule it violated. Veth had watched this process with an emotion she didn't have a word for in Keth. The closest approximation was the feeling of watching a river find a new channel, the sense that the landscape was the same, but the water was going somewhere it hadn't gone before, and there was nothing you could do about it, and you weren't sure you should want to. She retired 11 years after the confiscation. At her formal departure, San asked her if she thought the Compact had handled the situation with the humans correctly. "No," she said. "Should we have handled it differently from the beginning?" "We should have," she said, "asked different questions from the beginning." He waited. "We kept asking what they were building," she said. "We should have asked why they couldn't stop." In the archive of the Integration Authority, in a physical record storage unit on the administrative station where Veth had spent most of her career, there is a box. It contains the original inventory documents from the confiscation operation. All 430 items, cataloged and numbered. Most of them were eventually returned. Under the terms of the partnership framework, in the months following the negotiations. At the bottom of the box, in a sealed transparent container, still blackened at one end, still smelling faintly of something organic and old and irreducible, is the cylinder project left on the floor. Veth kept it. She told herself it was because it was evidence, technically still the property of the authority, never formally returned to the human who left it, logged in the inventory under item number 7. But she knew, in the way you know things you don't say, that she had kept it because of what Vasquez had told her it was. A demonstration, some things can't be taken. She had thought for a long time that this meant the humans' knowledge couldn't be taken. Their capability, their distributed, embodied, impossibly redundant network of understanding that lived in hands and notebooks and vocal memory, and the specific weight of a component designed to encode a schematic in its proportions. She understood eventually that she had still been wrong. That was not the deepest layer. The thing that couldn't be taken was not the knowledge. It was the asterisk need. The compulsion that sent 600 people to a dead relay station without being asked. That kept a team working in notebooks after their equipment was gone. That built water reclamation systems from wrong components and made them work anyway. That left a 400-year-old fire starter on a floor that was about to be searched, not as a taunt, not as a trick, but as a truth told quietly to whoever was paying enough attention to hear it. The Dominion Compact was the oldest continuous governmental structure in the explored galaxy. It had integrated hundreds of species. It had, over 4 centuries, developed a framework for understanding what a civilization was, what it needed, how it developed, how it could be guided. It was not cruel and it was not stupid. It was, within its own logic, very nearly wise. It had simply never encountered a species that built not because building was useful, or because building was profitable, or because building was commanded, but because the alternative to stop, to be still, to leave the world exactly as it was found, was experienced by that species as something indistinguishable from dying. The Compact had tried to take their tools. What they had not accounted for was that the humans did not experience a tool as a thing separate from themselves. They experienced it as an extension, and you can take an extension. You can confiscate it, catalog it, box it, lock it away. But the reaching doesn't stop. It never stopped. And in the end, it was the reaching, not the technology, not the strategy, not the negotiated framework, not even the energy transmission system that would quietly, over the next 40 years, dismantle the Dominion grid's infrastructure monopoly piece by piece. It was the simple, unkillable, irrational, completely unstoppable human need to reach further than they were standing that reshaped the galaxy. Not because humans were the strongest species in it. Because they were the only species that couldn't conceive of a reason to stop trying. The cylinder sits in the archive. The burn mark on its end is 400 years old. Somewhere in the outer stations, 600 people who once built in a dead relay station without being asked are building something new. In the spaces the Compact's maps call noise and static and empty background radiation. They haven't told anyone what it is yet.